My name is Amanda. I am here to share my favorite and least favorite books from 2024. Happy 2025, everybody. I hope the new year is going swimmingly. Also want to use this video as a kind of jumping off point for Booktube. I've tried to film a few kind of intro videos just talking about myself and like my goals for the channel and all this, and I think it's just easier to jump into it. Real bare bones, basic facts is I'm 32. I live in North Carolina in the US. I have a little over a year and a half year old son named James. And I also live with my husband, Ben, and our dog, Penny, who I'll put a little clip of her because she's real cute, and you can see her, even though she will probably bark at some point as I'm filming this. So if you hear that and you hear me curse, that's why. I'm gonna jump right in. We're gonna talk about my favorites and my least favorites. I think that's how you kind of learn a lot about someone's taste, is like the books that they love, but also the books that they didn't love and why. I find these videos really fascinating. At the beginning of the year, I watch everybody's videos, even people that I'm not subscribed to, and I don't know, because I'm so curious about what everyone's favorites and least favorites were. So yeah, let's get started. Let's jump into it. So the way I've kind of arranged this is I've put the books in pairs. So I have paired my favorite book, one of my favorite books of the year, with one of my least favorite books of the year, and I tried to kind of match them up to each other the best that I could. Some are a little bit of a stretch, but just kind of to organize it, because I definitely have two top books of the year, and they're really mainly like the whole series. There's two series that I read in their entirety this year that are like my favorites, and then the ones underneath that, the order of how much I like them is kind of interchangeable. Like I can't really rank them. I feel like it would change depending on my mood and depending on what day it is. So I just kind of paired them up with some books that I really didn't like that I feel like are kind of similar in some way. Starting off, we have books for the lit fic girlies. So I'm gonna hold them up, and you can decide for yourself which one you think is the favorite and which one you think is the least favorite. These are both books that I think are much more focused on character than plot. They both have plot elements to them, but they're very much more about like the human condition, if that's the way you want to phrase it. If you guessed correctly, yes. Once There Were Wolves by Charlotte McConaghy is on my favorites list. This book is just absolutely so beautiful and so powerful, and I really kind of, after I finished it, I had to sit with it for a little bit, if that makes sense. It wasn't like immediately like, oh my gosh, 5-star favorite of all time, but the more that I've been away from reading it, the more I've thought about it and the more I've liked it. So this book follows our character named Inti, who is Australian, and she is a biologist, and she has come to Scotland with her twin sister Aggie, because her goal is to reintroduce wolves into the Highlands of Scotland. So all the wolves have been hunted or died out, and as a result, all of the deer population in Scotland has become kind of overrun and is eating all of the vegetation, which is just really negatively impacting the environment. This book is very much set in it's basically our present day, but the climate change impact has just gotten slightly worse than what we're currently experiencing. It's not too far removed from our current reality. She is there to reintroduce the wolves, and a lot of the locals are very kind of resistant to that because they're worried that the wolves are going to eat their livestock, like their sheep and their cows and stuff like that. And they're also just scared of the wolves in general because they're predators, and they're like, what if they attack humans? What if they go after our kids? Stuff like that. The book really examines the idea of how we as humans are like the biggest predator out there, but yet you know, we don't really reckon with the impact that we have had on the environment and on the impact we have on each other. And we are scared of things like, you know, wolves that are just behaving as natural, you know, creatures do. It just has such beautiful and atmospheric writing. We really focus a lot on the nature of animals. There's a lot of talk about wolves, obviously, in this. And there's a lot of discussion about the violence that is perpetrated by humans to each other and the harm that we do to animals, to the environment, etc. There is like a mystery element to it. So one of the farmers of the town is found dead. Town is probably going to blame the wolves because they're already predisposed to not like them. And so our main character is really trying to figure out what happened because she doesn't believe it was the wolves and she doesn't want to believe that it was the wolves. And so there's a little bit of like a mystery plot line to this. It's very much like literary fiction with a dash of mystery. It's not like a mystery novel, I wouldn't say. Also discussion, like heavy discussion of like domestic violence, domestic abuse. So like moving and tense, but also very inspiring and very hopeful in its tone overall. Yeah, I loved this a lot. And then afterwards, like I've been thinking about it a lot after reading it. So that is Once There Were Wolves by Charlotte McConaghy. So on the flip side of that, a book that I thinks it's very profound and moving and all of the things that I said about this one, but I don't agree, is Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney. I think Sally Rooney's just not going to be an author for me. I also read Normal People and just was like, okay about it. And this one I actively dislike. In this one we're following Frances, who is pursuing a writing career, kind of. She's not really doing a lot, but she's, I guess, kind of pursuing that. And her and her best friend and ex, Bobby, kind of run into this woman named Melissa, who's a photographer, and her husband, Nick, who sucks as a person. And bad choices ensue. I don't know. Like, it's not, there's not really much of a plot to this one. It's very much about, like, the characters. And I can understand kind of why people might resonate with this because, you know, it does feel kind of true to life in some of the decisions that the characters make. But there's just absolutely no character growth from beginning to end. Like, I don't feel like any of the characters learn anything from their actions. I don't feel like any of the characters are interesting or likable or any combination of those two things. And the punctuation thing with Sally Rooney, I know James Joyce and blah, blah, blah. I know that that's a thing, but I don't like it. I don't like to read it. The lack of quotation marks, the lack of paragraph breaks is just, it's incredibly frustrating because it makes you like reread things trying to figure out who's saying what. I just don't think that the writing is anything special with Sally Rooney, and everyone loves her, and I don't get it. I don't get it. And I'm sad about it because I would love to be like a Sally Rooney girly, and I'm just not. And I have to live with that for myself. I want to be excited about like Intermezzo and Beautiful People or World or whatever that book is, and I just can't be. So yeah, recommend. I mean, this one I don't think I need to recommend or just recommend because everyone knows who Sally Rooney is. This one though, if you haven't heard of this, I'd give it a go. Let's talk about romance next. But I have 3 in particular that stood out. 2 that stood out because I liked them, and 1 that stood out because I did not like it. So we'll start with the positives. A Funny Story by Emily Henry. Obviously this was a huge release this year. We follow Daphne, and her fiance, Peter, discovers that he's actually in love with his childhood best friend, Petra. Peter and Petra, like, ooh. He is basically like, so I'm in love with her, get out of my house, essentially. So she has to move in with Petra's ex-boyfriend, Miles. And the two of them one night drunkenly decide to RSVP to Peter and Petra's upcoming wedding as a couple. And so now they're kind of like, well, we don't want to take it back and sound pathetic, so we're going to just pretend we're dating. So it's kind of like fake dating. It's kind of like a friends to lovers type situation. It's, you know, it's roommates, like they're, you know, unlikely roommates. Overall, I really like Emily Henry's writing style. I like her romances. This one in particular, it does a really nice job of blending like the character's personal growth with the romance aspect. Both of our main characters kind of go through some personal growth in this together, which I think is really nice to see. Also, I love Miles. He's a great love interest. I think what I love the most about the way his character is done is that he also has flaws. I read a lot of romance this year, actually, more than I've ever read in previous years. And what I've noticed as a trend is a lot of like really perfect male love interests, which I get because we're in it for the like, you know, men written by women, like that fantasy component of it. But I also think having a character that also is well-rounded and has flaws is more interesting to me. Miles is still a good guy. He's like a golden retriever. He's so nice and friendly and sweet to everybody, but he also has things that he has to work on. I think that's important in my ability to like believe in the romance and believe in their relationship. And I also, one aspect of it that I really loved too was that Daphne is a children's librarian, talking about as a kid, she didn't really know how to interact with other kids and she kind of preferred talking to adults. And now that she's an adult, she finds her interactions with kids to be so much easier than her interactions with adults. And I found that very relatable. I was a teacher previously, and I definitely found that a lot of the time where it was so much easier to interact with kids than it was adults. But as a kid, I gravitated more towards interacting with adults. So I don't know what that says. You know, that's my own issue to work out. But I really liked how she was relatable in a lot of aspects because of that. I really was moved by it. I cried at the end of this book, just out of like happiness, like, you know, when you watch a rom-com and you're like so happy that they've gotten together. It was just really sweet and it was a really good time. And of all the romance that I read this year, I think this one stands out maybe the most. Maybe the next one I'm going to talk about too. They're kind of like neck and neck. But yeah, I really enjoyed this one. And so then the other romance that I really enjoyed was Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. Abby Jimenez and I had a year. I read all 3 of the books in that like Part of Your World series. You know, it's like they're all independent of each other, but they're all kind of interconnected. And Part of Your World was my favorite of the 3, even though I really loved Yours Truly until the very end. I don't want to talk about the end of that book. So Part of Your World follows Alexis, who is an ER doctor, and she's from this like really prestigious medical family, like Vanderbilt kind of level people, that like basically own the hospital. And she kind of, through a series of circumstances, stumbles into Daniel, who lives in a small town, and he's the mayor of the small town, and he's also like a carpenter, and he runs a B&B. And he's a little bit younger than her as well. So they are just very different. And so that's kind of the like, they're leading very different lives. And so she's like, how do I fit my world with your world? How do we make this work? She doesn't want, like, she's, you know, found a lot of joy with him. How can they're so different and there's so many like kind of obstacles in their way. How are they going to make it work? Main draw of this one for me personally is the like small town of it all. Like a lot of quirky characters, and just the dynamics of that is something that I'm always really going to enjoy. I think it's the Gilmore Girls enthusiast in me. Just loves a small quirky town. It was just so cute. It was this one. It didn't like make me cry or anything like that, but it was just very sweet. Like there's baby goats in this. Like I don't know what else you want really. Then on the flip side of that, I think this is something that Abby Jimenez does that Emily Henry also does, is we also like real life happens while you're falling in love with someone. And in this one, there's a lot of discussion of an emotionally abusive relationship, which I think felt really well done to me. I don't really have experience personally with that, but I really feel like the way that it was written could be so genuinely helpful for someone who doesn't maybe realize that what they're experiencing is emotional abuse. It felt very responsible in the way that she talked about it and the way that she handled it. And so I really enjoyed how that was, and it doesn't take up so much of the plot where it feels really heavy. I think it's just balanced really, really well. Abby Jimenez and Emily Henry are like making a romance reader out of me, which I wouldn't have really expected. I don't know. I don't know if this is a popular or an unpopular opinion. I feel like I see people kind of with a range of thoughts about this author. Let's talk about Ali Hazelwood. Let me preface this by saying I read her young adult book first, which perhaps I should not have done, as I am no longer a young adult and I have to make my peace with that. But I did. I read Check and Mate by Ali Hazelwood. Plot-wise, we're following Mallory Greenleaf, and she is pulled back into the world of chess after she stopped playing chess. She was like well-renowned, well-ranked playing chess, and then she stopped because it destroyed her family, which is a questionable take, honestly, based on when you find out what happened, you're like, what? But she gets pulled back in kind of by happenstance, and she just happens to be like the world's best chess player, who also is a very hot, tall young man. God, it sounds so old. He's like 21, I think. She happens to beat this young man and in chess, and then it's, the relationship ensues. I mean, so I think my biggest problem with this and why it makes me kind of hesitant to read more Ali Hazelwood is the writing style itself was painful at times. This one in particular, because it's written for a younger audience, comes across as an elder millennial, which, hi, that's me. So like calls coming from inside the house, but it's like an elder millennial who is trying to be relatable. It's like, very like, how do you do, fellow kids kind of vibe. I think the biggest example that I always like kind of think of when I think of this book is head desk is used as a verb, like unironically. So the writing style itself is just very full of trying to talk like the youths talk. And it comes off like, is cringe the right word to use here? Like, I know I sound like that sometimes when I talk because I'm trying to sound young, but so I know that like I am guilty of this, but I'm also not writing a book and making millions of dollars off of it. So I give myself a little bit more grace. I really hated the writing style. I also hated the main character, Mallory. I found her insufferable in this book. She's very much like, oh my God, I'm so good at chess, but I hate chess. But I'm so good at it, so like I have to play for my family. But it also ruined my family. But I'm so good at it, and I'm beating all of these people who've devoted their lives to it. And I'm just like, I beat you, but like, oh my God, I had to play. Like, so frustrating. She spends so much time fighting being pulled back into this chess world, despite being like immediately extremely successful in it and not really going through a lot of hardship with it. And so I found that incredibly frustrating. And I know that that's like a YA trope of like, you can't try to be good at something. You just need to be naturally good at it and have someone just recognize your talent. The other thing that really bothered me with this is the third act conflict in this. So the third act conflict, Mallory finds something out that has been kind of kept from her. And she is upset about this. And because she's upset about this, she yells at our love interest, Nolan. I don't think I said his name. The top-ranking, like, young man. I have to just go with that now, is named Nolan. And the things that she says to Nolan, I'm sorry, they are unforgivable. Like, I was not rooting for them to be together. I was like, my guy, you need to move on because she does not respect you as a person. And I really hated it. And it's never dealt with, never addressed. Like, he's not even mad at her for saying these things. And I couldn't get over that. I really couldn't. Mallory's in this position where she's been kind of parentified. Her mom has a chronic illness, and so she has been kind of supporting her sisters. So she's pretty like strict with them, and she sets a lot of boundaries for them. And then her mom starts to do better and kind of steps back into that parent role. But it's never addressed of like, hey, you took on a lot of responsibility at a really young age. Thank you. Never addressed. It's just like, you don't have to do this anymore. You're good. Like, you can stop worrying so much. We're all fine now. And I found that to be like, that's really frustrating that wasn't dealt with either. Yeah, I hated Mallory personally, but I also felt bad for her for the things that she was having to do and sacrifice for her family. And it's not really ever acknowledged. It's just like, yeah, that happened, but now that's not a thing anymore, so don't worry about it. I'm like, no, we should probably have some sort of therapy in here to deal with what has occurred. I think it's kind of the opposite of the other two romance books, where the real life personal drama issues are handled with like care and responsibility. And then in this one, I don't feel like it was. I think it was just a very convenient plot device to get her to play chess even when she didn't want to. So yeah, this was not for me. I don't know if Holly Hazelwood's going to be for me. I'm willing to try an adult book of hers because it could very much just be that this was not written for me, which is fine. But also, hold on, let me get on my soapbox a little bit about this here too. I don't like that mentality, even as I say that. I don't like, you can't criticize a YA book in any way because it's not written for you. I have read so many incredible, my favorite book of 2023 was a young adult book, and it was so good and so well written. So I really don't think, there might be certain aspects of this that I didn't like because it just wasn't relatable to me, but a lot of it was just the way that the writing was done, the way that the plot was handled, the way that the characters were written, and that has nothing to do with it being YA. So, step off the soapbox there. So yeah, next up, we're going to start to kind of move into some fantasy type reads. I've grouped these two books together because they're both, I feel, intended for, really for me. They were written for me personally. No, they're really intended for people that read a lot of fantasy in their teens and like at their young adult years. And now these are adult books, but they're written by authors that have written YA before, or they're written, I think, with certain kind of YA tropes in mind, so kind of some ideas. There's some crossover there. So the two books, I'll put them up here. I don't think this will be a hard one to figure out which one's the best and which one's the worst for me. I really don't. So yeah, Ninth House. Ninth House is on my favorites list for this year. So Ninth House is actually a reread for me. I read it in like 2019 whenever it came out, and then I reread it in 2024 so that I could move on and read Hellbent, the sequel. And the first time I read Ninth House, I did not give it 5 stars, and I don't know why, because it's so good. It's so good. I loved it on this reread. We follow Alex Stern. She is recruited to join to go to Yale University, even though she is not your typical student. She has a really rough history. She's, drug dealer boyfriends, dead-end jobs, and was the sole survivor in an unsolved homicide. So a lot of rough stuff in her past. And the reasons for that are very linked to the reasons why she is recruited to go to Yale because she is tasked with helping to monitor Yale's secret societies with their occult activities. She has certain gifts that help her to do that. Basically given free tuition, you know, come be at Yale, take classes, all of that. But then at night, you're going to be helping out these secret societies with their like dark arts that they are doing. This book is so interesting in the way that it talks about privilege and class and how it talks about magic intersecting with those things. The magic in this book is very much used to gain power, to gain money, to gain influence, and not in any sort of altruistic way. And I found that fascinating. I found the like dive into the secret societies at Yale to be very interesting. I don't know how Yale University feels about this book being out there in the world, but you know, I guess name recognition. I also really liked our main character. She is trying to survive with the odds really stacked against her. And so sometimes she makes good decisions, sometimes she makes poor decisions, but you can understand all of her decisions. She is such an interesting and flawed and like smart main character to follow. And she has really compelling reasons for doing what she does in this book. And yeah, I just loved it. Like, it's very dark academia vibe if you are, you know, I mean, I guess it's more dark academia adjacent because I don't know. I don't really know how that's classified. But it has those vibes for sure. I didn't love Hellbent as much as Ninth House, but I'm definitely going to continue on in the series. So, Leigh, get on those books. Let's write a few more here. I would love to know where we go next. Oh, Darlington. Oh my gosh. I almost forgot to mention Darlington. Love him. I love him. And I love him even more after the second book, and nobody can change my mind. And that does leave Iron Flame in the worst category. Now listen, there are a lot of Fourth Wing haters out there. I'm not one of them, okay? I actually enjoyed Fourth Wing. I didn't, like, there's definitely issues with it. It's not a perfect book, but I had a lot of fun with it. And I really, like, I understand people's issues with it, but I liked it. Okay? I'll admit it. And that's why I went to read the second book. So I did not go into this book intending to be a hater, but here we are. So, you know, this series follows Violet Sorengale, which, what a name for a main character. And she survived her first year at Basgiath War College. Spoiler alert for the first book, even though that's not surprising. And then we just have to live with the fallout of what happened in book one, in book two. Like, this was rushed. This was incredibly rushed. As far as it just was like, oh my gosh, this first book was so successful. Get another one out as quick as you can. Like, that was the vibe of it. I mean, the plot holes in this book, you could drive a truck through them. Like, there were so many things that didn't add up, so many things that didn't make sense. And I think there were a lot of things that were an issue in the first book, that I electively decided to ignore, that I had a harder time ignoring in the second book. And then these two main characters, so Violet Sorengale and Xaden with an X. Their relationship dynamics in this book are so incredibly frustrating because we basically like hit a hard reset. All of the growth of their relationship that happened in the course of the first book is all just kind of dashed and put off to the wayside, and we kind of have to start over. So they're having these same conversations over and over again of, I love you, but I can't trust you. But I love you, but I can't trust you. Just like ad nauseum. And it is just, it's so frustrating to read. A lot of the elements that I found fun in the first book felt repetitive and boring in the second book. And I think it was way too long. I think we needed to sit on it for a little bit longer, edit a little bit more before it was rushed to print. Even if you loved Fourth Wing, I don't see how you weren't disappointed by Iron Flame, because it felt kind of disrespectful to the readers, honestly, of like, this is just blatantly just a cash grab. Like, let's get this book out as quickly as we can to make the money and capitalize off of this. And it did not feel well realized and well fleshed out. I'm curious about the third book, but I'm going to wait for reviews to come out before I commit myself to reading this like 600-page book, because I'm just not going to do it to myself. So next up, I put these two books together because they're both what I would call fantasy without the fantasy. So we have Last Tale of the Flower Bride by Roshani Chokshi and Weyward by Emilia Hart. Both of these books feel like they are fantasy books, but they do not have very much fantasy, if any, in them. So they kind of fit together for that reason. However, one of them I loved and one of them I hated. Which is which? That's right. I loved Last Tale of the Flower Bride. I loved Last Tale of the Flower Bride so much. This book was great. We follow a man who is not named. He's just known as the bridegroom. And he marries the beautiful and mysterious Indigo Maxwell Castaneda. And she marries him under the condition that he never asks about her past. He never finds out about her past. But then they have to return to her childhood home, and the secrets start to come out, particularly surrounding her childhood best friend named Azur. Everything starts to just be revealed. It's very little plot, mostly vibes. Okay? That's it. It reads like a fairy tale, but like with a dark kind of horror bent to it almost. The writing in this is some of like my favorite writing that I've ever read. It's just so engaging, even though there's not a lot happening plot-wise. It deals a lot with like obsession, like really like the dark edge of fairy tales. And so I've bookmarked some stuff here, as I had always found the rejected stepsisters of Cinderella far more captivating than the story's namesake, and now I know why. When the shoe did not fit, they cut off their toes, sliced off their heels, squeezed their feet into glass, and lowered their skirts to cover the pain. Perhaps, in the end, the prince made the wrong choice. Such devotion is hard to come by, after all. I've started, like, bookmarking quotes in this to highlight, and it's just, like, I started doing so many that I had to stop because I don't want to just be reading quotes this entire time. This is just a wonderful little book. I enjoyed it so much. And I would highly recommend it. That leaves this book being with one that I didn't enjoy and that I would not recommend. So this is Weyward by Emilia Hart. It won several Goodreads Choice Awards. It won Best Historical Fiction and Best Debut in the 2023 awards. And we follow 3 different women. Their stories are kind of woven together. We have Kate, who's in 2019 and fleeing an abusive relationship. Altha, who is in 1619, who is on trial for murder and accused of being a witch. And then we have Violet in 1942, who is feeling very trapped and isolated on her family's like sprawling estate in World War II era. I felt like this writing was very simple and not very exciting. There's lots of telling versus showing. I don't really feel like this author trusts the reader to come to conclusions on their own. So our 2019 perspective has discovered the journals of one of the past women and is talking about, oh my gosh, how terrible that she's going through all those things. But our 2019 perspective is escaping an abusive relationship, and she's also having a really hard time. And reading it, you can make that connection yourself, but the author makes sure to say, perhaps things haven't changed so much after all. Like, which that's just like the example of I don't trust that you're going to make the connection between the fact that women were treated badly in 1619 and are still treated badly in 2019. So I'm going to tell you to make sure that you get it, because I don't think that you're going to get it. Which, media literacy is what it is, so maybe she has a point, but I was annoyed by it. This is definitely like trying to be a feminist book, but it's a very like limited scope of feminism, of just, white privileged women who have it rough. And like, that's the only thing that's ever discussed in here, which I'm not saying that this needs to address every issue, every societal issue that affects women, but I just felt like it was such a narrow scope, and it felt like it was saying something really profound, and it really wasn't. None of the three main characters that we were focusing on I found particularly interesting or engaging. I found them to just, like, the main distinguishing factor between them is the time periods that they were in and the situations that they were in. Like, them as characters and as people didn't feel very differentiated from each other. It was just like, oh, okay, we're back in 1619, so I know who we're following. It didn't do a lot of character work, I felt. And it's a very character-focused story, so that is a problem. My last issue with this book that I think is perhaps slightly unfair is this was marketed as, like, witchy. Like, the crow on the cover, and, like, it was very much like, ooh, there's magic, and ooh, there's witchcraft, and blah, blah, blah. And it was barely a factor in the plot. In fact, it was a very convenient factor in the plot to, like, get our characters in and out of sticky situations. And other than that, it wasn't really explored or discussed or dealt with at all. And so I was waiting for the catharsis of finally getting to see the powers of the women, and it wasn't that satisfying at the end of the day. So the next category is fairy books. These have been really popular, obviously, in the past few years. And I read both of these this year, and one of them I loved and one of them I hated. Which could it be? That's right. I loved The Cruel Prince. And I'm not going to apologize for it. This is a young adult book, and these have been out for a while. This is not like a new release. So this book follows Jude. She was taken. Her parents were murdered, and she and her sisters were abducted by the Fae to go live in the High Court. And the Fae in this world despise humans, particularly Prince Carden, who is the youngest son of the king. And Jude is kind of put in a position where she has to, as a human who is much less powerful and, despised by these creatures, she has to try to find a way to navigate this world. I feel like this fantasy world that we're in for this one, I really just enjoyed it a lot. It felt very fairy tale-esque, sensing a pattern in some of my picks here. I really, really love Jude as our protagonist in this one. She's complicated, she's interesting, she's smart, but she's not, the chosen one who is like the best at all things. She uses the abilities that she does have, her intelligence and her kind of social awareness, understanding, after observing the Fae for so many years. She uses all of those things to put herself in the best possible situation that she can. It's not like she is just magically like the only human that's not affected by Fae or what, like that is typical of a lot of books, is like there's the one girl where the vampires can read everybody's minds except for her. This is very much a human with human characteristics who has to learn how to exist in this world where she is viewed as less than and viewed as weaker. There's also a lot of like court politics in this. There's a spy plot where she's having to like work kind of undercover, and I don't even want to call it a romance in this one yet, but there is kind of the enemies to lovers vibe. And it is the slowest of slow burns, and that is what I want, because they're actual enemies. I think that the enemies to lovers phrase gets thrown around a lot, and they're actually just like kind of mildly dislike each other, and they're not actual enemies. They are actual enemies, and they start to see each other in different ways. But it's very, very slow. It takes its time, and you kind of understand. And there's a lot of like angst in this that I ate it up. I just found it so fun to follow. And I'm so excited to continue on in the series because I really just feel like this is my flavor of this kind of fantasy for sure. On the other hand, we have this one, which I thought I was going to love. And so I'm very sad that I didn't. This is Emily Wilde's Encyclopaedia of Faeries by Heather Fawcett. This just did not work for me in the way that I thought it was going to. We follow Emily Wilde, who is researching and investigating fairies. She is in this small, remote town trying to learn more. And she is joined by her academic rival, Wendell Bambleby, which, like, okay. And he is very charming and gets along really well with all the townsfolk, and she is not. She is very socially inept. She does not do well interacting with people. And so they're going to kind of work together to get more information about fairies. But also there's, you know, a little bit of like a mystery of like what's happening to the townspeople and what's going on with the hidden ones, which are like the fairy folk that are like more dangerous. And also Wendell is a little bit mysterious. Not really. I think pretty early on you kind of figure out what his deal is, but Emily is in, you know, kind of investigating him a little bit too. So this is told in journal entries, and that I think was my biggest issue with it. I don't feel like the journal entry format worked very well with the plot and with the writing style of the book. Emily is very, you know, she's a researcher, she's very academic, she uses a lot of like, you know, fancy academic words, and reading that in this like journal style format, it just felt very disconnected to me. Be writing in her journal, and I'm like, this is like, and she says like, this is my personal journal, so this is, I'm gonna tell everything that happened, whether it has like academic value or not. I'm gonna just narrate my life. And so if it's a personal journal, I feel like the language that she chooses to write with is very needlessly complicated, and it was difficult to read, honestly. The plot of this, I got really lost. I got really confused by the plot, especially towards the end. I was just kind of like, wait, what's happening? And what? Who's that? Like, it just, I don't know. It really kind of fell apart towards the end for me. I think the biggest draw of this book that is advertised is the relationship between Emily and Wendell. And I just didn't buy it. I didn't buy them as rivals, as academic rivals, first of all. And then later on, as they start to like, you know, fall for each other or whatever, I didn't buy that either. And their relationship never felt very fleshed out or believable to me. I had so much fun with this, and I really like believed all of the characters' motivations, and the plot and everything really hit for me. This one, not so much. So do with that what you will. The last kind of pairing that I have to talk about of best and worst are mystery thrillers. And I'm not even gonna try to have you guess for this one. I'm just gonna tell you that one of the worst books, I'm sorry, let me rephrase. The worst book that I read this year was The Housemaid's Secret by Freida McFadden. So this book is the sequel to The Housemaid, and our main character is Millie, and Millie is continuing with her shenanigans from the first book because she's apparently learned absolutely nothing and has had no character growth whatsoever. And so we're literally back in the same situation. She's working as a maid because she can't get any other jobs because they do background checks, and she has a criminal history. And so she gets a job as a maid for a very wealthy family, a very wealthy couple. And she starts to suspect that things are amiss. Things are not the way they seem. I don't even, like, what is there to say? I didn't actually hate the first book, The Housemaid, but I certainly hated this one. Millie herself is an incredibly frustrating protagonist to follow. And I think more so in this second book than in the first. We are constantly told that she is so smart. She is like brilliant. She's so smart. Where is she? She's not. She makes such bad decisions over and over again. And I know that the reason she makes those decisions is to serve the plot, but we're not given compelling reasons for why she's making those decisions. And so it's just, she figures things out because of luck and because of sheer happenstance. It is not because she is like a great investigator or anything like that. And she also sucks as a person. So like, I'm not even rooting for her. Like, you know, sometimes you have characters where you're like, oh, you're dumb, but at least I want you to be successful. I want you to figure things out, even though you're kind of not making the best choices. I think she is not she's written as like, we're supposed to think she's a good person, despite her like dark past. We're like, oh, but she's actually a good person. But I'm like, no, you're not. She, in this book particularly, she's stringing along this guy that she's dating that she doesn't like, because he's rich. And she's like very openly in the narrative saying like, oh, I don't even really like him that much, but he's very wealthy, so I'm gonna keep dating him. And it's just like, okay. There's one of the very first scenes in this book that really rubbed me the wrong way was she's working as a maid/nanny. And she's fired in the like opening chapter of the book. And the reason that she's fired is because the child that she's nannying is like 9 months old and starts calling her mama. And she calls her mama in front of her actual mother. And the actual mother freaks out and fires Millie. And in this scene, the mom takes the baby away from Millie and, tells her to get out or whatever. And this baby is so upset and confused and crying out for Millie by saying mama. Like, she's crying out for her and she's like so distraught, and Millie leaves. And then she's like telling this story later of what happened, and she is laughing hysterically telling this story. Like, she thinks it's so funny what happened here. And I'm like, this child is traumatized. Like, it's not a funny situation. Like, it's kind of stupid that the mom would freak out in the way that she did and whatever, but like, how is this funny to you? This child is bonded to you and is now emotionally like distraught over the fact that she doesn't get to see you and interact with you anymore. And do you not care about the relationship that you've built with this child at all? Like, I don't know. Like, it really was like, this is the woman that we are supposed to care about and root for, is the one that is laughing at the pain of a toddler. Like, okay. So yeah, Millie is not a good character. And then this book just in itself is copy-paste, changed the font from the first book. It's literally like, let's take the plot of the first book, because everyone ate that up. Everyone loved that. Let's take that plot and do it again, change a few minor details, and then just put it out there into the world. And it just feels, again, similar to Iron Flame, blatant cash grab, capitalize off of the success of the first book, but don't actually put any thought into what you're creating and what you're putting out there for readers. And I find that frustrating. I think more frustrating than, like, if a book is actively trying to be good and just isn't, it may not be my favorite book to read, but I'm okay with it. But when I can tell that a book is just out in the world to be out in the world and to make money, I don't know. You got to care about what you're putting out there a little bit, I think. So I don't think I'll be reading more Freida McFadden in the future. I don't know. Maybe I'll give her another shot, but definitely not this series. Like, I know that there's more books in this series, and I'm done. I'm out. No more for me. So we are into my like top 2 books of the year, but really it's series. It's 2 series that I read in their entirety in 2024. Specifically in both of these series, the last book in the series was my favorite, but I think that is just a product of being so familiar with the characters and the world, and it's just natural, I think, that the concluding book in a series is going to probably be your favorite if you've enjoyed all of the other books. So here she is. The Last Devil to Die by Richard Osman. the entire Thursday Murder Club series up to this point, but particularly this book. Our Thursday Murder Club gang is comprised of 4 elderly people that are living in a retirement community. They, in the first book, they initially come together because they enjoy solving cold cases and going through like old police reports and trying to solve the mystery. And then they start to be introduced to an actual mystery that is happening that they are trying to solve in real time. And there's 4 books in the series. This is the final one. Each book follows a different mystery plot. In this one, they discover that an old friend has been killed and that he had a package that he was protecting and that has gone missing. And so they are trying to solve A, who killed him, B, where did this mysterious package go? And like, what is there to say about this series? Honestly, like, I would die for Joyce, Elizabeth, Ibrahim, and Ron. I love them so much. I'm so excited about this movie, or I don't know if it's a movie or a TV show that they're doing, but like Helen Mirren is in it, and like Ben Kingsley. Like, I'm so excited about that. But these characters are really what make this series so special. I think even the side characters like Bogdan and Donna and all of the like the police investigators that are working alongside them, even some of the like antagonists in the book, you just like, you really connect with all of these characters and understand their motivations. And I think Richard Osman has a view of humanity similar to like someone like Frederick Bachman with his books, where it's just like, humanity is good. Like, overall, humanity is good and people are good, and sometimes they do bad things, and sometimes, you know, there are people that are inclined to do bad things. But overall, like, the world is good and the world is a good place. And it's a message that resonates, you know, really, really deeply with me. All of these books are just a mixture of being funny and sweet, but also have a really engaging mystery. I don't think that the mystery suffers because you're trying to focus on the characters, and I don't think that the characters suffer because you're focusing on the mystery. Like, I think it's a good mix of both. And in this book specifically, if you've read it, the letter and the fox, and that's all I'm gonna say because I'll start crying. It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful and moving and wonderful, and I just cannot convince enough people to pick up this series. I just think it's the greatest like mystery series that I've ever read, and I stand by that. So yeah, that is Thursday Murder Club series, specifically The Last Devil to Die. I just love it. The last book that I'm going to talk about, I've run out of least favorite books, which is exciting. And so this is my top number 1 series, number 1 book of the year. And that is The Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee, specifically the 3rd and final book, Jade Legacy. I'm going to say the most incredible fantasy series that I've ever read. This was so incredibly well done. It is unique. It is interesting. It has incredible world building, incredible plot, incredible characters, and just a really like compelling magic system that is unlike a lot of magic systems in fantasy books. So this series follows a world in which people are able to utilize jade. And if you can harness jade, if you can wear it and control it, it gives you essentially superpowers where you can run really fast, jump really high, fight really well, you know, heal, etc. It is following specifically one family, but it also examines a lot of different characters and a lot of different perspectives. So you have people that can control jade and use jade and control it, and then you have people that can't. And how does it impact both of these groups? How does it impact the country where Jade is from, so this is a fantastical country called Kekon. In the first book, we kind of are more focused on that one country, and really even the one city within that country. That is like where all of these different like crime families are fighting over control of Jade. And then in the second book, we kind of expand a little bit more. And so we start looking at neighboring countries and how does the use of Jade impact those countries, and how do they try to control it themselves and gain access to it. And then this final book, I think it's more focused on what you leave behind and what you care about, the legacy that you have. There's a lot of talk about honor and loyalty and family in these books, and this is more so about the old traditions and the old ways versus kind of a new generation coming in, and how do each of these generations interact with Jade and interact with the power structures that are in place. The characters in this, all of these characters have done terrible things. They're part of a crime family. It's very like Tony Soprano, Breaking Bad, where objectively as a person that what they're doing is wrong, and you're rooting for them anyways, and you definitely want them to get away with it even though you probably shouldn't. The growth of a lot of these characters is just incredible. You're spanning from their mid to late 20s until their 50s or so you're following the entire adult lives of a lot of characters. I sobbed at the end of this book, or I sobbed in the second book too, but I sobbed in this one specifically for reasons that would definitely be spoilers. But the other aspect that I want to highlight with this is the intentionality of these books. So things that are planted in book one, in chapter one of book one, come to fruition in books 2 and 3. And it's so cool to see. And I think that part of it is me reading them one right after the other. I just went Jade City, Jade War, Jade Legacy, boom, boom, boom. And that allowed me to really see the groundwork being laid in books 1 and book 2 for the payoff in book 3. And it is such a good payoff. And it is so cool. I want a TV show, I want a movie, I want something to be adapted from these books, but I want them to do it well. So, double-edged sword there, I guess. But yeah, this is absolutely incredible, and my number one recommendation of any of the books that I've talked about. This series is number one. I will say though, with that, I will give the caveat of this may not be for every reader. I think that if you are not into a lot of intricate world building and a lot of fantasy politics and stuff then you're probably not going to like this. But if you're into those things at all in any capacity and you haven't read these books, you need to. That's it. Those are my favorite and least favorite books of 2024. It's steadily gotten darker in this room, so sorry about the lighting change. I don't know what I'm doing, so that's part of the problem. Hopefully I will see you soon with another video. If you're so inclined and you would like to subscribe and like and share and I don't know what else with this video, do that. And okay, that's it. Bye.